Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're continuing our Victoria 3 Beginner's Guide with a look at how to manage the national treasury. While the wealth of your individual pops determines how well they're able to meet their own needs and prosper, the wealth of your nation needs to be considered separately, used to maintain your military might, to pay your government employees, and to position yourself against the other great powers of the world. Now, as the saying goes, time is money, so let's not waste any with a longer introduction here. With timestamps down below and a reminder to subscribe for more Victoria 3 content, let's begin. Treasury, budget, loans, and bankruptcy. We've previously talked about the people living in your nation and their standard of living, wealth, income, expenses, so on and so forth. But those layers exist and operate separately from your national treasury with just a few touch points between them. Your national treasury brings money in from a variety of sources, while it gets spent on things like goods and wages for government-operated buildings and military expenses. As you can imagine, keeping those aspects of your nation operational is paramount to your success, but before you start panicking every time this number turns red, it's important to understand what all this means. First of all, this number is a representation of your current weekly balance. If it's in the positive, it means you're accumulating wealth from week to week, and if it's in the negative, it means you're eating into your reserves from week to week. Below the number is a representation of said reserves, which is the money you actually have saved up. If it ever empties out completely and you're still losing money, it starts to refill in red, a representation of accumulating debt which, while a little concerning, isn't necessarily the end of the world at first. Should the bar fill up completely in red, then you've hit your credit limit, and then you're in a touch of trouble, as we'll discuss in a bit. But if you get a positive balance, the red will start to reduce, and the bar will begin to refill in gold to once more represent your gold reserves. To see a numerical representation of this, you'll need to look at the tooltip showing you your reserves if in the positive and your credit and credit limit if in the negative. Alternatively, you can click here or here and then go to the Assets tab and see some more details showing you how much debt you're in, your credit limit, your gold reserves, your weekly balance, and more we'll discuss in a moment. Note that there are diminishing returns on accumulating too much wealth. There's a soft cap on how high your gold reserves should be, calculated as a percentage of your GDP. And approaching that cap starts to slow your economy down, reducing the rate of further wealth accumulation, ultimately leaving money on the table. Raising your GDP will push this cap higher, allowing you to accumulate more wealth before suffering the slowdown, and a higher GDP will also make you a more attractive partner for diplomatic actions that are focused around economic deals. GDP aside, accumulating wealth allows you to actually operate at a deficit from time to time, which can be a necessity in times of war and expansion, when providing support to businesses in the form of subsidies, when providing support to people in the form of welfare, as a luxury should you feel like reducing the burden of taxes on your citizens, or to increase wages for government and military employees, helping them flourish while appeasing different interest groups. All that to say this: operating at a deficit is not the end of the world. If this number stays at a negative for a prolonged period of time, it is not game over. Just make sure you're doing what you can do to eventually stop the bleed and turn this number positive. You have a decent runway until your gold reserves run out and you hit your credit limit. If you do hit your credit limit, your nation goes into default, pausing all construction and reducing building throughput more and more over time until your balance becomes positive again, or you declare bankruptcy. Declaring bankruptcy is an absolute last-ditch effort to save your economy, as it comes with a huge set of penalties. All construction gets immediately canceled, and cash reserves across all buildings gets wiped out. Pops that own shares in said buildings will also become radicals immediately, and apart from that, you'll suffer 10 years of penalties to your military capabilities, prestige, interest rates, and construction efficiency. Declaring bankruptcy is not ideal, so never click this button on a whim. With the budget screen open, you'll be able to see a per-state analysis of your income and expense, with tooltips giving you a further breakdown of where those numbers are coming from. Don't be overwhelmed by this. This level of granularity is rarely needed, if ever, but it can be fun to go through if you're curious, and it can help you find outliers in your expenses or states that could use some more attention, as we'll discuss. This screen is where most of your attention should go, and everything here is the topic of today's video. Taking tributes. One of the most efficient ways to make monies in Victoria 3 involves simply collecting tributes from other nations. Some countries start with many such subjects, but most will need to put in some legwork to get the cash flowing, and when picking which nations to bully into submission, there are a few things to consider. For one, the target nation's rank determines if they can even be subjugated. Decentralized powers cannot be subjugated, and if you're playing as an unrecognized power yourself, you will not be able to demand other nations transfer their subjects to you. You will still be able to vassalize others, but more on that in a bit. Apart from checking country ranks, you should consider how quickly you'd be able to defeat them should it come to war. Pick on somebody smaller than you, as they're likely to field fewer troops, and you're likely to be able to conquer all their territory quickly, preventing co-belligerents from their side from actually getting any damage done unless you're extremely unlucky. Also, prolonged wars are expensive, so you want it to be as short and quick as possible. You should also check their barracks to see what kind of production methods they use, comparing them to your own to see who has the technological superiority, a huge determining factor in diplomatic plays and war alike. If you've picked on somebody smaller and weaker than you by a significant enough margin, they might just give up without a fight, granting you an easy subject. Apart from comparing your strength to theirs, you should also consider their financial value. A subject's contributions to your economy is a percentage of their national revenue, regardless of their budget, regardless of if they're making money and then losing all of it. Whatever money they make, you get a percentage of it. So you just need to make sure they're making a lot of money. Nations with a higher GDP tend to have a higher national revenue, but it's also indicative of more productivity, which is in turn typically indicative of more pops being taxed more heavily. You can always check a nation's current taxation policy if you're curious, and you can check how much they make off of each individual state too, but that's far too tedious. A great indicator of a nation with decent national revenue is if they have gold mines. Head over to Lima, select the Buildings tab, and head to the gold mines. Then click on Gold, and switch to Show Production Map Mode. You don't have to go to Lima to find gold like this. You can go to any one of these green-colored states, but many states don't start with gold and only get it when it eventually gets discovered. Lima, however, always starts with gold and is a guaranteed way to find this screen. Either way, anywhere you see green is a good place to either conquer or have as a puppet, because gold production directly translates into large amounts of revenue. Note that gold mines have a higher potential revenue generation than gold fields, so try and prioritize nations with gold mines as targets. Once you pick out your targets, hit them with either the Make Puppet diplomatic play or Transfer Subject diplomatic play. A puppet gives you 20% of their national revenue, whereas other subject types give lower amounts, and we're here today for the money. Now, if you have the Vassalized play instead, it means you're an unrecognized power, and this is the best option you'll have until you've become a recognized nation. Vassals still net you a decent 15% of their national revenue, which isn't insignificant. So remember, if you want to maximize income from your subjects, you want them to be puppets or vassals, nothing else. Do not underestimate the value of subjects. Puppets will make you very rich, and you have to do barely anything to keep the money flowing once you've subjugated them. Fine-tune taxes and tariffs. Taxes and tariffs are a core source of income regardless of which nation you're playing as. Taxes are divided into different categories, and the way your tax rates are distributed between them will have an impact on your society. Income tax impacts all strata of society by taking a percentage of their wages. Poll taxes are a flat tax amount that applies to almost all pops, depending on policies I'll explain in a moment. As a flat rate, it tends to have a greater impact on the lower strata as they lose a larger percentage of their income than those making more money. Consumption taxes are applied to goods, asking pops to pay a surcharge when they purchase certain goods as defined by your selections. When you go to add a new consumption tax, you'll see how much revenue each will generate and how much authority it'll cost to maintain it. The goods you choose to tax will also have an impact on your pops. Having a grain tax, for example, will hurt the lower strata of society quite a bit, whereas having a tax on luxury furniture won't really hurt the lower strata since they don't buy luxury furniture in the first place. With that said, the quantity of the good in question consumed and its value come together to determine just how much money you'll get. So something like a grain tax will typically have the largest impact on your economy since it usually moves at such great quantities across all pops. Finally, dividends taxes only impact the wealthy pops who own businesses across your nation. Dividends are paid to business owners when their businesses are profitable, and this type of tax focuses on that specific type of income. The specific pops being taxed are determined by the production methods at each building, since that's how business owners are determined on a per building basis, but by and large, anybody making money off of dividends is likely to be a wealthier member of society. Adjusting the taxation levels will change the percentages applied to each of these categories of taxes, but if you change your taxation policy entirely, you'll see a complete change in the makeup of your taxation efforts. For example, land-based taxation has land tax as the only form of poll tax, applied only to peasants, while per capita taxation has a lower land tax for peasants, but includes a per capita tax for non-peasants with higher income tax rates too. This means that as soon as your population is largely comprised of non-peasant pop types, you should move away from land-based taxation as its value to the national treasury diminishes greatly. Proportional taxation tries to equalize taxation across all strata of society by having income taxes and dividend taxes at an equivalent percentage. This ends up taxing the rich more as business owners pay both dividend taxes and income taxes. Graduated taxation, meanwhile, puts a heavier load on the business owners with a significantly higher dividend tax and a middling income tax. Consumption-based tax, meanwhile, is purely based on, you guessed it, consumption tax. The tooltips will let you know how your revenue will be affected by changing your policies, but keep in mind that there's more than your revenue at stake here. The entire makeup of your society is impacted by how they're taxed. Beyond policies and rates, it's important to keep in mind that if your bureaucracy is at a deficit, you'll see tax waste reducing how much money you actually collect. The bigger the deficit, the bigger the tax waste. Having too many trade routes, generals, or incorporated states can be the big hits to bureaucracy, but those will often be necessary expenses you cannot get rid of. To generate bureaucracy, then, you'll want to build and expand government administration buildings. A higher-level government administration building produces more bureaucracy, with additional throughput helping generate even more. That throughput modifier means a higher-level government administration building has better results than a new one built from scratch at the same cost, time, and effort. You'll need to be very wary about overusing the state's infrastructure, of course, as explained in the video I've linked under the I at the top right corner of the screen. Changing the first production method will make a big impact to bureaucracy generation, though it'll demand more goods and different employees as well. Apart from that, government administration buildings also generate taxation capacity. This applies at a per-state level. Every state has a taxation capacity, with each point of it representing the ability to efficiently manage 10K pops in the state. The moment the population in the state surpasses this limit, you'll start to see rapidly increasing tax inefficiency, which means you're leaving tax money on the table across all categories of taxation. To counter this, you'll want to either build or upgrade the government administration buildings in the state, or change their production methods. There are certain technologies down the Central Archives branch of the Society Tech Tree that help with this as well, alongside some laws too, but the easiest and most readily available solution involves the government administration building. On the topic of states, you should keep in mind that POPs in an unincorporated state do not pay any taxes whatsoever, so you should make sure to incorporate these states as soon as you can afford it. It'll add a temporary drain while the incorporation is happening, and then a permanent drain thereafter that is partly determined by the state's population, so keep that balance in mind. Don't just incorporate every state as you collect them. Wait until the population within it is worth taxing due to their income and employment. Tariffs are just another kind of tax, specifically applied to trade, calculated as a result of the tariff set on a good and the volume of that good moving along a trade route. This means a higher tariff alongside a higher amount of goods traded will be a significant increase to your revenue, but unfortunately, those two elements are diametrically opposed. Tariffs are paid by the trade centers managing the import and export of goods through trade routes that either you or other nations have established, and so it directly impacts the revenue and wages at said trade center, who will adjust the volume of goods traded to ensure they can stay profitable after tariffs and wages have been paid. Your trade policy will have an impact on the percentage tariffs you apply, and then you can go to the Market tab, visiting each individual good to set specific tariff policies. Do you charge more when importing, when exporting, or as balanced an approach your policies allow? Changing tariffs has a direct impact on how many goods are actually moving through a trade route, as again, trade centers will try to balance their revenue against how much they need to pay in tariffs. Extremely profitable trade routes can have high tariffs applied, as the loss will be marginal compared to the trade revenue, but make sure you're applying the right kind of tariff policy. If it's a good that's primarily exported, you can increase the export tariff, and if it's primarily imported, you can increase the import tariff. Note that since tariffs apply on both sides of a trade route, a good way to maintain high tariffs on your own end without sacrificing trade volume is by preventing the other side of the agreement from charging any tariffs. This saves your trade centers money and encourages them to keep trade volumes up. In order to do this, you'll either want to establish a trade agreement with the trade partner, or you'll want to establish a treaty port in one of their states, or, as a most extreme approach, you might want to force them to open up their markets and adopt the free trade policy, forcing them to remove tariffs with all their trade partners for an extended duration of time. Whichever way you decide to do it, removing tariffs is a great way to encourage increased volume of trade while still collecting tariffs on your own end. And remember, even trade routes that don't generate revenue for the trade center still generate revenue for the nation through tariffs. You just have to make sure the trade center isn't suffering from too many of these poor trade routes, forcing them to reduce operations. Invest in investment pools. Investment pools are a massive differentiator when it comes to developing your nation and its capabilities, so make sure you're using them to their fullest. It's important to note that your economic system will determine if you even have an investment pool, with interventionism, agrarianism, and laissez-faire being the ones that bring in investment pool contributions from capitalists, aristocrats, or a mix of the two. If you have an investment pool, the associated POP types will take a portion of their weekly balance from buildings they own and put it into this national investment pool, representing their interest in helping the nation establish more businesses. The buildings they'd be willing to help build using this investment pool money are determined by the economic system as well, and it's paramount that you try your best not to build any of these covered categories unless there's investment pool money to help make it happen. Naturally, you can choose to build the buildings and pay for the construction out of pocket, but if you let the investment pool accumulate over time, you'll find you can build all sorts of production hubs without needing to invest anything but time. When choosing a building to build, it will let you know if the investment pool will cover it and if there's money in said pool. When construction starts, you'll see the usual temporary negative to your balance, but you'll see an additional positive that counters that negative from construction. This transfer of money from the investment pool will only last as long as the negative from the construction does, or until the investment pool is drained, whichever happens first. And you can see how the investment pool is predicted to change over time up here too. While it won't always be possible, you should do your best to only build the buildings covered by the investment pool when enough wealth has accumulated in the pool to cover the construction cost. Otherwise, you're spending money you could have saved. Either way, that only covers material costs. To help with wages, you'll need to look at cutting costs and minting money. Wages at construction centers, government administration buildings, and ports are all paid for through government wages. If you don't care to keep your intelligentsia happy, and if the wealth of these employees is not a top concern, you can consider reducing their wages, though be careful not to keep their wages low for too long, as this will ultimately hurt their wealth and standard of living, having greater repercussions as discussed in previous videos. Similarly, military wages can be reduced to save money on your professional army at the cost of upsetting the armed forces and taking money out of the hands of officers and servicemen. Beyond the people at these buildings, you can make a huge difference in your expenses by reducing the cost of the goods these buildings use as well. Construction goods can be adjusted en masse with a click of a button over here, or you can pause all construction entirely to help stop the cost associated with construction goods. But apart from that, whether it's construction materials at construction centers, paper for government administration buildings and universities, chips at ports, or military equipment, all these costs accumulate quickly, and by either increasing production locally or importing a significant number of these goods, you'll be able to reduce your cost much like a private business would reduce its own expenses. On the topic of private businesses, remember that subsidies that you use to keep businesses afloat during financial trouble are taken out of your national treasury. Removing these subsidies will reduce this expense, but keep in mind some economic systems enforce the use of subsidies across the board to represent government involvement in securing POPs getting paid. Subsidies are essential to apply when a private business is unable to maintain productivity for one reason or another. It'll typically drop wages and start losing employees, which can spiral it towards bankruptcy or leave large parts of your population underpaid. So there is a good reason to apply subsidies, but just make sure they don't stay beyond their necessity. And just like subsidies help businesses stay afloat, welfare payments help people stay afloat. Depending on your welfare policies, Welfare payments kick in when pops are being paid less than a certain fraction of the expected normal wage. You can change your policies to reduce welfare payment amounts, but this requires a decent amount of time and dedication, as it is, in essence, a policy change. Diplomatic pacts refer to any tributes or war reparations you're paying to other nations, while interest only kicks in when the nation is in debt, money beyond your principal that you owe to the various debtors that you borrowed from within your nation's wealthy class. The banking branch of the society tech tree helps reduce this interest rate when and if you have to face it, and it also helps increase how much money your nation can actually mint. The biggest contributor to minting is your GDP, a number that fluctuates based on the value your nation produces. If you want to boost your GDP, you'll want to make sure you're establishing businesses that produce expensive products, and then you'll want to keep exporting these products to keep their value high, subsequently keeping their impact to your GDP high as well. With the production lens activated, you can see exactly what each state produces and the contribution it has to GDP. This applies not just to your own nation, but to foreign nations too, and it can act as a quick way to build invasion plans, establishing war goals that allow you to prioritize the states with the highest and most suitable goods output. As briefly mentioned before, gold is particularly good to chase for conquest, as it is a significant boost not just to GDP, but minting as a whole. Every gold field gives a boost to minting, and gold mines are able to give a significantly higher boost to minting as well. Getting the atmospheric engine nice and early, followed by nitroglycerin and the steam donkey, are great relatively early ways in which to increase the output of your gold mines, and expanding gold mines to improve their throughput is a great idea too. Don't forget to apply the Encourage Resource Industry Decree to further increase the throughput of these mines, furthering how much gold and, of course, yes, minting they provide as well. Remember that more opportunities to acquire gold mines and gold fields alike will come up in the future as they're discovered over time. Plan your future conquests and endeavors accordingly, as gold can be a huge driving force behind the most powerful of economies. Money makes the world go round. Regardless of what kind of society you're attempting to build, this simple fact holds true. Make sure you're using these tips to keep yourself away from bankruptcy, and again, remember that operating at a deficit isn't the end of the world. In fact, many times, it's an absolute necessity to come out on top in the long term. I hope this video helped you get a few ideas regarding your financial situation in Victoria 3, and if it did, don't hesitate to hit the like button down below and let me know in the comments. If it really helped out, you might even consider leaving a super thanks. Jokes aside, feel free to subscribe to the channel for more Victoria 3 guides, let's plays, and more, and don't hesitate to join the Discord linked in the description down below if you're looking for people to play with or a place to learn the game. As always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.